Welcome to part two of our three-part video series on why Pavilion for SQL Server, a chat with a database expert, part of the Pavilion video series. I am Costa Hasapopoulos, the Chief Field Technology Officer for Pavilion Data. I am joined today with David Klee, the founder of Heraflux Technologies and a deep SQL Server consultant. In this video, David and I will chat about the value of what high-performance storage can do and mean in a SQL Server environment. Again, this is part two of our three-part video series. So before we get into the next part of our video series, I wanted to introduce my co-presenter today, David Klee, the founder of Heraflux Technologies and Sequilibrium Education. David is a performance tuner, enterprise DBA, infrastructure architect and consultant, and self-proclaimed geek. David's a great partner of Pavilion. We've worked with many of our customers to help them optimize their SQL Server environment, to take advantage of not just what Pavilion can do, but to help them solve their most challenging SQL Server problems that may or may not be related to Pavilion. David's a great SQL Server expert, VMware expert, and a great partner of Pavilion. With that, let's continue on with the interview. David, one of the key things, and these are, databases are typically mission critical or, the thing that runs a business. So they need to get data somewhere else, whether that's from an HA perspective or from a DR perspective, which, as we know, are two different use cases. From the lens of SQL Server, what are the tools that SQL Server has to, do HA as well as DR?
Me personally, I like to do both of them in one feature. There is a feature of SQL Server called availability groups, and it is absolutely fantastic. Essentially, it gives me the ability to have multiple instances of these databases, either synchronously replicated for high availability or asynchronously replicated for disaster recovery or maybe nearline reporting, things like that. And I can do it in one management interface. So if I'm looking at highly available architectures, the storage layer replication with these things in everywhere, it will replicate at a periodic basis. That means data loss if something were to happen. What you end up doing is you really want to let your DBAs manage this within the database layer. So you cut down the recovery point objective, you cut down the recovery time objective, and you let them manage that layer. And now you can end up confirming, hey, if this machine fails, we have no data loss because we're synchronously replicated over here. We have a 5-10 second failover to get to this other machine. You're back up and running and life is good. From a DR perspective, asynchronous replication with availability groups or 1-minute log shipping or mirroring, there's a lot of different options there. But me personally, I still like availability groups because, again, it's one single pane of management glass to get to it. Now you can actually track the recovery time and actually look at the delay and actually set SLAs against it. And in a lot of cases, we're still talking sub-second latency for the replication stream to get to DR. And that is power, because then you can state clearly, hey, we have not exceeded our SLAs for this since this thing has been turned on, and you can track it, you can watch it, you can stake against it.
That's all in the SQL Server ecosystem, whether you're using Pavilion, Pure, EMC, Dell, it's SQL Server.
Yeah, there's a lot of replication technologies, but quite frankly, I want the best of breed, and that's going to be inside the database engine itself. It's built for it. It's really what's being used on a lot of different cloud providers today to do this level of replication. And the DBAs know this stuff. The DBAs are the ones that have their head on a pike if the SLAs are breached. So let them use the right technology to do this and maintain or improve, exceed those SLAs.
Great. So David, of course, see the logo up on my shirt and up above here, Pavilion. I'm a little bit biased. Our performance is great in block and file and object, and latency is incredibly low. But everybody will say their latency is low. An example, you can, no one advertises that they're really slow or they have really high latency. Everybody says best in the industry. But our latency is all measured in microseconds, sub 500 microsecond latencies. How does that compare in your experience as an independent consultant with, Heraflux up there in the corner of your screen and on your shirt? What's your experience relative to some of the competitors out there for Pavilion?
Where do I start with that one? Um, Long story short, we have worked on virtually every storage array on the planet in production and test and R&D. Most of them have targets of less than 1 millisecond. Some are 2. Some have some very steep claims. Most of them perform pretty good. But when you start talking microseconds versus milliseconds, again, if you can go 1 millisecond to 500 microseconds, that's 2 times the speed of that business operation within the database. Most of these arrays out there are built for concurrency and reliability. Performance has always been secondary for a lot of them. That's changed in the last 5 or 6 years, but you're still looking at good all-flash arrays out there in the 2 to 10 millisecond range. With these big database workloads, a lot of times that's just simply not good enough, which is why a lot of people historically have stuck with local attached storage. Now local attached NVMe, and it's fast, but it's a single point of failure. When you start looking at Pavilion, we are definitely talking microseconds and low microseconds. And if I can do this in a redundant, reliable, external shared platform, I've got literally the best of everything. I have the fastest possible latency to disk. I've got the IOPS there when the demand is there. And now I can share it and have this power for all of my databases rather than local attached single points of failure.
Yeah, it's good comments. And I want to give a little fairness to our competition. You said a lot of people are, 2 milliseconds and all that. Some of them are a millisecond, or a little less than a millisecond, but it's typically high microseconds. But, so I want to give them credit, for that. But here's the difference of this is because of our multi-controller, we can pretty much guarantee that almost on every single host. As those systems and the dual controllers, that may be 1 SQL Server, and you add 2 more on that, all of a sudden that performance isn't the same because they're all going through what we said in another question, all through that 1 CPU or couple CPUs, right? That 1 controller. So I think that's a pretty big difference in our architecture, that
It's
enables
massive.
that.
Well, it allows the power of the platform to really flow through all the different layers instead of funneling it into a bottleneck. And again, the bottleneck could be small, but it's there. And this way we can work through that architecture and really get the best of everything.
So David, as a little bit of a fun joking thing is you introduced us to a pretty important team at VMware that you work with a long time, a long-standing relationship with these folks, because you said, you guys, VMware, you need to learn about these guys. Their performance is incredible, right? So I'm delivering the presentation and I'm showing our performance numbers. And the gentleman said, Costa, I don't want to offend you, but I don't believe you, right? And then he kept going like this, and we weren't all on videos. David, is this true? And that in that 1 hour conversation, he did that 3 times. In other words, it was so unbelievable. He had to go to somebody that was a trusted person to say, have you seen this? And you're like, yes. Pretty funny conversation we had, wasn't it?
Oh, it's phenomenal. These folks have seen everything. They work on everything. They manage everything. To have them do basically a double take on it was amazing. And it's like, not only do I believe it, but I've been testing it. I've been pounding on this thing and I hardly believe it. And it's great.
So David, when we were talking about VMware and the effect of what a super low latency solution with Pavilion and optimized VMware SQL Server configuration can do, you have a big economic calculator, but the end result was it results in some pretty material savings to the customer as a result of some technologies and some impact on the hardware and configuration. Can you provide a little color on that?
You bet. This is one it gets really deep, but it hits a CFO as well as a CIO. In most cases, the limiting factor to virtual machine density is not in the CPUs on the host, but in the memory. Everybody knows SQL Server is going to eat all the memory that you give it. Why? The working pretense of basically anything relational database is that storage is slower than memory. Therefore, working set data comes out of RAM in order to make speed quick. If it's not in memory, it has to read it from disk. If there's no room in RAM for the data you want to work on, it kicks data out, makes room for it, and then loads it up. Well, what happens if the storage is super fast? Do we need as much memory? And I would argue with the biggest systems in the world that as the storage speed increases, if you have to drop to disk, the impact is so small, it's barely even measurable, let alone noticeable, even for these really big business critical workloads. So think about it. If we can decrease our memory footprint of these big systems by 25, 30, maybe even 50% and maintain the speed or even improve it, what does this do to the virtual machine host density? Now, a side note on this, the database engine licensing can be by virtual machine CPU, but more often it's by physical machine CPU core. So if we can pack more SQL servers on the same physical machine and license it there and maintain performance with CPU overcommitment, being careful in the memory densities and all this, if the storage speed is super fast, I need less hosts, and therefore I have less hosts to license. And therefore, I save a ton of money on SQL Server licensing. And that's power.
Yeah. Very interesting. So at the end of the day is either take your same hardware you have and run more stuff on it, which saves you money or defers costs, or on a future buy less as big hardware, and that saves you money, and as well as the software licenses. So
exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Spend a little bit more on extra memory and you get even greater density in there. It's by the right CPUs. You got the biggest bang for the buck. Everybody saves and it's faster to boot. Everybody wins.
That completes part 2 of our 3-part series, Why Pavilion for SQL Server, a chat with a database expert. Please see part 1 and part 3, where David will provide many more insights of how to optimize SQL Server to take advantage of high performance, low latency storage like Pavilion. If you want to learn more about Pavilion, check out our other videos at www.pavilion.io or reach out to us at email at info@pavilion.io, or you can always call us on the phone. We'd love to talk to you about how we can help you solve some of your most challenging storage-related problems and help you deliver great outcomes to your business. Thank you.